Okay, so have you ever told like a little white lie, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to spare someone's feelings? You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
like maybe you told a friend their haircut was cute when it wasn't, or
Right.
told your partner their cooking was amazing when it was a little burnt.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Those are what we call benevolent lies,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to be at the heart of our deep dive today.
Okay, cool.
We're going to be using this source, ch2.txt,
Okay.
and we'll be exploring, how and why we use these little deceptions
Mm-hmm.
to navigate difficult situations and protect people we care about.
Yeah, I think one of the most fascinating things about this topic is the tension that it reveals.
Right,
On the one hand, we're taught from a young age that honesty is the best policy,
right.
but then we constantly find ourselves bending the truth for the sake of kindness
Yeah.
or social harmony.
Yeah, it's like we're juggling these two competing impulses, and it's hard to know which one should win out.
Right.
The source material really highlights this struggle by talking about Immanuel Kant,
Right.
who had a really strict view of lying.
Yeah, Kant believed that truthfulness was the absolute foundation of all morality.
Wow.
He even argued that lying is always wrong regardless of the consequences.
Really?
Yeah, so to illustrate this point, he used this extreme example of a murderer asking you where their intended victim is hiding,
Oh, gosh.
and Kant said, even in that situation, you should tell the truth.
I mean, I see the principle,
Yeah.
but I feel like in that situation, there's a lot more at stake
Exactly.
than just sticking to the truth.
That's where his philosophy kind of bumps up against the reality of how we actually live our lives.
Right.
Take, for example, how we raise children. We tell them all sorts of elaborate lies
Yeah.
about Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
All these things. We tell these stories even though we know they're not literally true.
Right.
And it really gets to the heart of this tension between honesty and kindness.
Yeah.
We lie to our children not to deceive them. Mm-hmm.
But to protect their innocence, spark their imaginations,
Right.
teach them valuable lessons in a way that's engaging and age-appropriate.
And it's not just about protecting them from scary truths.
Right.
Think about the classic story of George Washington and the cherry tree.
Yeah.
It's actually a complete fabrication.
Really?
Yeah, it was invented by one of his biographers, but it's a fabrication with a purpose. It
Right.
emphasizes honesty and taking responsibility for your actions.
Yeah,
And it works.
it does.
It's this enduring tale that teaches kids about honesty in a way that's more memorable
Yeah.
than just lecturing them about telling the truth.
Right. It shows that sometimes a well-crafted story, even if it's not entirely factual, can be a powerful tool
Yeah.
for shaping a child's moral compass.
Absolutely. And the source material talks about how this practice of using these protective lies
Yeah.
isn't unique to Western cultures.
Right.
The source mentions a study of Siltal-speaking Mayan parents in Mexico.
And these parents use a variety of elaborate lies to control their children's behavior. Like they'll tell their kids that if they misbehave,
Okay.
a monstrous owl will swoop down and carry them away.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, though, to see how these parenting techniques, which might seem strange,
Uh-huh.
or even deceptive to outsiders, are actually deeply rooted in cultural traditions.
Right.
And they serve important social functions.
So it seems like we're all, in a sense, being shaped by these benevolent deceptions from a very early age.
Yeah.
That's woven into the fabric of how we learn and grow.
Yeah.
So as kids get older, those childhood fantasies fade away.
Right.
But the benevolent lies don't exactly disappear, do they?
Not at all. They just take on different forms.
Okay.
Think about the undesirable gift paradigm.
Oh, yeah.
When you receive a gift that you absolutely hate,
Uh-huh.
but you have to smile and pretend to love it
Right.
to avoid hurting the giver's feelings.
Yeah, like when your grandma knits you a sweater that's 3 sizes too big
Exactly.
and covered in itchy sequins.
Yeah, we engage in this kind of social deception all the time.
Right.
It's about maintaining social harmony, showing appreciation,
Yep.
avoiding unnecessary conflict.
And sometimes those lies are about protecting people from difficult realities.
Right.
The source talks about how we might hide certain things from an aging parent,
Okay.
like the fact that their car needs major repairs,
Yeah.
especially if they shouldn't be driving anymore.
That's a really tricky situation because you're weighing the potential harm of the lie
Right.
against the potential harm of the truth.
Exactly.
On the one hand, you don't want to deceive your parent.
Right.
On the other hand, you're trying to keep them safe.
It's a classic ethical dilemma,
Yeah.
and there's no easy answer.
No.
But it shows how these benevolent lies can extend beyond childhood into the realm of adult relationships
Yeah.
where the stakes can be much higher.
And it raises some interesting questions about the limits of these deceptions.
Right.
Where do we draw the line between protecting someone and infringing on their autonomy?
Yeah.
Is there ever a point where a benevolent lie becomes too much of a burden to bear?
Those are really tough questions.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer.
No.
But it's clear that these benevolent lies, even when they're motivated by good intentions, can lead us into some ethically murky territory.
Absolutely. And as we move further into this deep dive, we'll explore how these deceptions play out in different contexts, from the workplace to personal relationships, and grapple with the complex ethical dilemmas they pose.
Sounds good. So we've talked about benevolent lies in families and relationships, but what about in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Does this kind of deception have a place in the professional world?
It's where things get even more complicated.
Right.
The workplace is full of potential pitfalls when it comes to honesty versus kindness.
The source talks about how coaches and managers often use pep talks to motivate their teams.
Think about like those rousing pregame speeches when the coach is like, you can achieve anything if you just believe in yourselves.
Right.
Or a manager who's downplaying the difficulty of a project to keep everyone on board.
Sure. A little encouragement can go a long way.
Yeah.
But where's the line between that and manipulation? At what point does a pep talk become a distortion of reality?
I think we need to consider the intent behind the message.
Okay.
Is the coach genuinely trying to inspire their team, or are they deliberately misleading them to achieve their own goals?
What about when you have to deliver bad news? Like laying off employees or announcing a budget cut?
Yeah.
Is it okay to soften the blow even if it means bending the truth a little bit?
Those are really tough situations, and it's tempting to want to shield people from the harsh reality.
Yeah.
But I think in most cases, honesty delivered with empathy and sensitivity is the best approach.
Because ultimately, trust is built on honesty.
Exactly.
Even when it's difficult to hear.
And a little bit of sugarcoating might make things easier in the short term, but it can erode trust in the long run.
So we've talked about family relationships, the workplace. What about the impact on the individual telling the lie?
Right.
Doesn't all this deception take a toll on our own sense of morality?
That's a great point. And this is where Dan O'Reilly's research comes in.
Yeah.
He's a behavioral economist who's done a lot of work on dishonesty, particularly this idea of the fudge factor.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
Have you?
Yeah, it's this idea that we all have a limit on how much we're willing to lie,
Right.
even when we can get away with it.
O'Reilly argues that we're constantly balancing our self-interest with our desire to see ourselves as good, honest people. So we allow ourselves to fudge the truth a little bit, but only to the extent that we can still feel good about ourselves.
So it's like we have this internal moral compass that's always calibrating,
Yeah.
trying to find that sweet spot where we can justify our actions even if they're not entirely truthful.
Exactly. Think about it like in everyday examples.
Okay.
Maybe you round up your charitable donations on your taxes to get a bigger deduction.
Right.
Or you tell a friend their haircut looks great even though you think it's a little too short.
Or maybe you just conveniently forget to mention that extra slice of cake.
Exactly.
After dinner.
These are all examples of how we fudge the truth in small ways.
Right.
To make ourselves look better or to avoid an uncomfortable situation.
But Aries research shows that we have an internal limit on how much we're willing to fudge before it starts to eat away at our integrity.
Yeah, it's like we have this built-in hypocrisy detector that goes off when we push things too far.
So this tension between our desire to benefit ourselves and our need to maintain a positive self-image is at the heart of this conversation about benevolent lies.
Because ultimately, it's not just about whether a lie is right or wrong. It's about how those lies impact our sense of self, our relationships with others, the fabric of trust that holds society together.
Before we get into those broader implications, I want to circle back to one of the most powerful stories in the source material. The story of Pete and Hope Troxel.
This is where the source material takes a very personal turn.
Yeah.
Pete and Hope lost their daughter Alicia and her unborn child to an opioid overdose.
It's a heartbreaking story of loss and grief.
Yeah.
During the funeral, Pete sees an eagle soaring overhead and interprets it as a sign of Alicia's ascent to heaven.
Wow.
It's such a powerful moment.
Yeah.
And you can really see how desperately he needs that belief, that sense of hope.
To cope with this unimaginable tragedy.
And the author, faced with this choice of offering a purely rational, maybe even bleak perspective, chooses to validate Pete's source of comfort.
It's a beautiful example of how sometimes empathy and compassion trump the need for absolute truth.
So in the face of profound loss, sometimes a little bit of manufactured hope, even if it's based on a symbolic interpretation, can be a powerful source of healing and resilience.
It raises the question of whether there are times when a benevolent lie, a story we tell ourselves or others to make sense of a difficult situation, can actually serve as a psychological life raft. To help us navigate the choppy waters of grief and loss.
It's like those comforting narratives become a form of self-preservation, allowing us to hold on to some meaning and hope in the face of overwhelming darkness.
That brings us back to Dan Ariely, who has his own personal story about benevolent lies in coping with trauma and adversity.
Ariely was severely burned in an accident when he was younger, and he spent years in the hospital undergoing all these painful treatments and surgeries.
He talks about how the medical staff would often shield him from the full extent of his injuries, painting a much more optimistic picture of his recovery than was maybe warranted.
And those lies, while well-intentioned, had a profound impact on his experience. In the short term, they gave him hope and motivation, but they also created a distorted perception of his own progress.
He talks about a time when the hospital staff brought in another burn victim who was further along in his recovery, but still looked pretty rough.
And for Ariely, who had been kind of sheltered from the harsher realities of burn recovery, this was a brutal wake-up call.
It really was.
It made him question the ethics of those benevolent lies, even while acknowledging that they'd probably helped him through a very difficult time. So it's an example of how these lies can have unintended consequences, even when they're motivated by a desire to help.
It raises the question of whether there's a point when shielding someone from reality,
even with the best of intentions, can actually do more harm than good.
It's a delicate balance.
It is.
On the one hand, you want to protect people from pain and suffering. But on the other hand, you don't want to rob them of the opportunity to confront reality. And develop their own coping mechanisms.
So when does a benevolent lie become a form of well-intentioned but harmful deception?
We've been talking about these benevolent lies in all these different places, families, relationships, the workplace. But there's one area where this gets really interesting. Healthcare.
Healthcare.
Because the stakes are so high. The source material mentions dementia care. This is where those fabricated realities come into play, creating environments and routines that might not reflect actual circumstances, but provide comfort and familiarity.
Exactly. It's a controversial approach, though. And it raises some big ethical questions.
Like, are we doing these patients a kindness by shielding them from this reality they might not grasp? Or are we depriving them of their dignity by perpetuating a fabricated world?
It's a tough call. On the one hand, you want to protect them from distress and confusion. But on the other hand, you don't want to treat them like they're incapable of understanding.
It's tough.
And it's not just the patient's perspective. What about the families and caregivers involved?
Are they complicit in this deception?
How does it impact their relationship with the patient?
It's really complicated.
It really is. And it makes me think about Dan Ariely's experience as a burn victim. He wrestled with these same questions.
He did.
About truth and deception.
Remember, at first, he really appreciated the medical staff trying to shield him? From the full extent of his injuries?
But later, he started to question if that had actually hindered his ability to fully process and cope.
It's like those lies created a bubble that eventually burst.
Leaving him feeling unprepared to face the reality.
Well, it's this tension between protection and preparation that makes this whole conversation so interesting.
How do we balance the need to shield people from pain with the importance of allowing them to confront reality?
And develop those coping mechanisms.
It seems like there's no easy answer.
No.
It really depends on the situation, the relationship, the individual.
I think one of the big takeaways here is that we need to be more conscious of the lies we tell, even when they're for good reasons. We need to ask ourselves, what are the consequences? Am I truly helping this person, or Am I just avoiding an uncomfortable situation?
It's about really thinking through the ethical implications.
Right. And that's not always easy.
Especially when you're dealing with love, compassion, the desire to protect people.
Sometimes the most ethical choice might be to tell the truth, even when it's hard.
Right.
But honesty doesn't have to be brutal.
Yeah.
We can be truthful with empathy.
Right.
And sensitivity.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Between truth and kindness.
A skill that takes practice and reflection.
So much to think about.
Yeah, we've really gone deep.
We've explored the psychology,
ethics,
the impacts.
Yeah, and I don't think any of us will look at those little white lies in the same way again.
We've learned that even well-intentioned deceptions can have unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And that navigating these complexities of truth and kindness requires a really thoughtful approach.
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive with us.
If this has made you curious, we encourage you to keep exploring.
Read more about Dan O'Reilly.
Yeah.
Delve into the ethics of dementia care.
Talk to a friend.
Yeah.
The more we understand about these dynamics, the better we can be at making choices that are both honest and compassionate.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of benevolent lies.
Until next time.